This video was sponsored by Bespoke Post.
Hey, you probably thought we forgot about this thing. You know, because it was winter time, you might be thinking we were gonna wait until spring to get back out here and finish it. That's crazy. We just got busy. Now that it's nice and cold and rainy, we figured it'd be the perfect time to put a roof on the treehouse. And once again, let me preface this by saying, I have no clue what I'm doing. I've never roofed anything in my life. So follow along, see how we do it, and critique us in the comments. But for now, going down. What the heck? Does this only have one direction? Uh-oh. Craig?
Now, the first challenge with roofing the treehouse was how in the world was I going to get up that high? But turns out there's this company called Sunbelt Rentals, and you give them a call, and they'll just deliver a giant piece of equipment to you. No questions asked. They literally didn't even care if I knew how to drive it, which I did not. But that's never stopped me before. So I hopped on this giant scissor lift thingamawhatsit and started trying to drive it into place. Eventually I figured out the controls and I got it worked right up next to the treehouse till they became best friends. And up I went. This thing's pretty sweet, actually. It goes up, it goes down, it goes forward, it goes backwards. It even has this cool platform that extends out to become basically the length of the treehouse, which is reassuring because when you're up pretty high and you're working on top of a roof, let's say you were to fall off that roof, it's nice to know that you got a soft metal basket you can land in. So up we went. Now the first thing we had to do was put some bracing on to kind of build out what will eventually become our soffits and also attach our fascia board. So I started by nailing this 2x4 connecting all of my roof rafters together. Now you'll see I have a little speed square that I'm using to make sure that the rafter is in a direct line with that 2x4, so that when we put our plywood sheathing on top of the roof, it all lines up and there's not a bump over the edge of that 2x4. Because this particular piece of wood was a little wonky, Craig did have to hang on it at one point so that we could get everything nailed in nice and straight. Now I could have tried to cut this to length on the ground and then nail it up there, but I thought, why do that when I can just leave it long and cut it in place? So after attaching that 2x4, I just cut it down quick and easy with the skill saw. Now the 2x4 is going to basically make a lip inside of our fascia board that we can attach the plywood for our soffit to. But I'm not really going to show that in this video. All you need to know is the roof. So before we can put the roof on, next we need to attach our fascia board. Now if you're wondering why they call it a fascia board, well, because it likes to fascia while you're working on it. Dad jokes. I don't know why it's called that. Anyways, a fascia board seems to be these big boards that you put, on the outside of roofs to trim them up and make them look nice. So again, I used the speed square to make sure that the 2x4 was in line with the corner of the fascia, which was in line with our rafters. So everything was in line. I'll show a closer version of this here in just a second so you can see what I'm talking about. After we got our 2x4 and our fascia attached to the end of those rafters, well, then we had to go down and wiggle the scissor lift in and out and back and forth around to the other side so we could do the same thing over there. There was just one problem. We didn't have nice wood chips on this side. We had a bunch of railroad ties that we painstakingly put in place. Well, we painstakingly removed them so that we could drive the scissor lift in and go up to attach all of our fascia board stuff up here. So we basically did the exact same thing on this side that we did on the other side. And here's what I'm talking about. The 2x4 is a little bit lower than the rafters and the fascia is a little bit lower than that, but everything is in a nice straight line so that when we put our sheathing over the top, it'll all fit together beautifully. Is that the right way to do it? I have absolutely no clue, but that's how I did it, so take that. With the fascia attached to each side of the roof, next we needed to do our fascia boards on the front of the roof, building, whatever you want to call it. Now these ones have to be cut in an angle because obviously the roof is at a pitch. But lucky for us, the pitch of that roof is a 12-12, which means that all of our angles are a simple 45 degree. So there wasn't really any math involved here. I loaded up the scissor lift with some fascia board, picked Craig up on my way to the top, and we began attaching the fascia to the front of our treehouse. That's not technically in a tree. Now the only nail gun I own that's not for furniture making or trim work is this framing nail gun. So I'm just going to use it for everything, whether that's right or not. After attaching our fascia with the angle cut at the peak, I just freehand cut our angles at the bottom. And as you'll see, I did a pretty darn good job. Look at that, just a little paint removed. Not too bad for the old eyeball. With all of our fascia boards attached on the front and back and sides, it was time to start adding sheathing to the top of our roof. So up we went to the first side of our roof, and I started taking measurements with my tape measure, because I'm not going to take them with my foot or my hand, and figuring out what we needed to cut our sheets of plywood to so that they would encompass our roof. Part of me really wanted to haul all these pieces of plywood into my wood shop and rip them down on the table saw, but I figured we're doing construction. Just cut them down with a track saw. Zip, zap, zoop. Only go inside if you have to poop. That's the contractor's way. Then with all of our sheets of plywood cut down to what I thought were the right sizes, here I'm just guessing from those initial measurements I took, we loaded all of our plywood into our scissor lift that I lovingly named the Millennium Falcon because it sounds way cooler than scissor lift. Anyways, we got all the plywood into the Millennium Falcon and we were ready to go warp speed. To be fair, I sped this video up to make it look cooler. We were going about a quarter of that speed, but we still felt pretty cool. Once we reached the top, it was finally time to remove this tarp that I hastily threw up before we left for England because I didn't want the treehouse to get all wet and icky. And then we started just plopping down sheets of plywood and nailing them in place. Now, I left them overhanging that fascia board about a ½ inch. I don't know why. This just seemed like a good idea, not to make them perfectly flush with the fascia. I don't know if that matters, but that's how I did it. We also left a slight gap in between each sheet of plywood because I just happened to be reading the outside of the plywood and it said that you should do that for expansion and contraction. So I did. Now we could only reach the first row of plywood from the Millennium Falcon. So after we did that first row, we grabbed some 2x4s and tacked them onto the plywood to kind of act as a step or a ladder system so I could climb out of the Millennium Falcon and safely up onto the roof. Free like a bird. I can fly. No, not really. If I could fly, this would be a whole heck of a lot easier. Now you might notice I'm not harnessed in. But don't worry, I'm being very careful, and if I were to slip, I'd just fall into the scissor lift. I even wrote a song about safety, called Safety First. Here it is.
Safety first. Safety first. Oops. You want to hand me that other?
Safety first. Safety first.
That was all staged. I mean, we didn't actually do that. I just did that to show you what happens if you're not paying attention and you're not focusing on being safe. So, if you're ever up on a roof without a harness that you climbed up onto out of a scissor lift, just remember, safety first. Anyways, we just kept tacking on that plywood until pretty soon we had plywood covering the entire first half of our roof. And it looked good, I guess. I really don't know what it's supposed to look like. I was just more concerned with pretending to be James Bond up there, climbing along the side of a roof, shooting at bad guys. I really didn't put much thought into whether or not we were doing things correctly. As long as we were looking cool, that's all that matters. Now, up until this point, the weather had been pretty good, but after we got that first half sheathed, it started pouring down rain, which was perfect because it was time to put on our felt paper stuff. Now, I don't know the technical terms of any of this roofing garbage. We literally went into the local lumber store, said, hey, we have a roof this size by this size. We want to put metal on it. Give us everything we need. And they gave us a big truck full of stuff and no instructions. So we're really guessing on this. I would assume this felt stuff is waterproof and that's why you put it under the metal, but I really don't know. The guy also said it was okay to nail a 2x4 to it so we could climb up the roof. So I don't really understand how that works. If it's supposed to be waterproof, but you staple it to the roof and put a bunch of little holes in it, and then you nail 2x4s to it, which puts some more holes in it. I guess they're banking on the fact that the real water resistance comes from the metal and not the paper. But we put the paper up there because the guy at the lumber store told us to. And at this point, that's good enough for me.
I'm jumping into the holiday spirit because it's the holiday season and perhaps you're looking for a great gift idea. Well, this video is sponsored by one of our favorite sponsors, Bespoke Post.
They send out monthly boxes full of awesome stuff, 90% of which is made by small brands located right here in these United States.
And it's cool stuff. I got 3 boxes here. Let's see what I got. This is the Hibernate box. Now you might be thinking, that's ridiculous. Humans don't hibernate. Well, that's because you haven't found the right hibernation gear. Like these things. Ooh, soft, comfy. Who wouldn't want to hibernate in these? And it comes with this room spray to make the atmosphere smell good. This is the swing box. If you want to be a swinger, not that kind of swinger, then you might want this box. Because when it becomes wintertime and you want to be outside chopping some kindling, well, you're gonna want this bad boy. All right, this is the cleave box. And if you're wondering what's inside, it's a cleaver. But this one's a cute little cleaver. Look at this thing. That's awesome. The thing I love about Bespoke Post is they always are sending out sweet knives of various shapes and sizes because you can never have too many knives.
So here's how Bespoke Post works. You'll get a box assigned to you each month based on the quiz you take when you sign up on their website. Each box is full of awesome stuff. It has around $70 in value, but you only pay a fraction of the price. Before your box is shipped, you'll get a preview to decide if you like it. You can either 1, keep it, 2, swap it for a different box or offer, or 3, skip that month altogether at absolutely no charge.
So, if you want to try out Bespoke Post, which I highly recommend because the stuff is awesome, just click the link in the video description and enter the coupon code WOODWORKING20. You get 20% off, or go to www.bespokepost.com/woodworking20 and sign up.
Now, because it was kind of hard to move the scissor lift around, we decided to do as much to one side as we could before moving the scissor lift all the way to the other side. So after getting our plywood sheathing on and our felt paper stuff, we decided to start hooking down metal. I laid out the metal on the ground and measured out how wide it needed to be to fit the roof, and then I had to trim down one piece a little bit. A friend of mine told me that you could do this by taking a regular skill saw and putting the blade in backwards. I didn't believe him at first, but it actually worked pretty darn good. So there's a little helpful metal cutting tip for you. Just maybe don't try it on like 1/4-inch thick steel. So with all the metal loaded up in the Millennium Falcon, once more we flew up into the stars, aka the rain of the Pacific Northwest, and we started laying out our sheets of metal. Now it was really important, at least I thought it was really important because I've never done this, to make sure that all of your metal is parallel so that it doesn't start creeping up or down the roof as you work your way across. So we took our time on that first piece, made sure that we got it nice and parallel to the other side of the roof, and then in the pouring down wind and rain, we started slapping pieces of metal up there. Now we're just putting one fastener at the base of each one of these sheets just to hold them in place, and then we'll go back and sink all of our fasteners once we're happy with how everything looks. Which, judging by the fact that now you're watching me sink more fasteners, must mean, hey, we were happy with how everything looked. So I went through and started marking out where all the fasteners needed to land, and then Craig came behind me and started sinking them in. And then at some point, we both started marking them out and we both started sinking them in. We were measuring each individual fastener to make sure that all of our rows of screws went along in a nice, straight, parallel, even line, because you didn't want fasteners just cattywampus all over the place up there. Now pretty soon we reached a point where we couldn't reach any of the fasteners from inside the Millennium Falcon, and we couldn't attach a 2x4 to the metal roof, so I invented Millennium Falcon ladder, where basically you just stick a ladder inside the Millennium Falcon, you raise it up until the ladder is at the same angle of the roof, and voila! OSHA approved ladder system for reaching the top of your treeless treehouse. I mean, I still think this is pretty safe. Worst case scenario, I slip and fall back into the Falcon. I mean, sure, there's an off chance that I slip and fall and bounce off the railing and then plummet 20 feet below, but if that happens, I'm just landing on bark chips. I mean, they put bark chips on a playground. There's a reason they do that. Nobody can get hurt falling on bark chips. Am I right? Pretty soon I had all the fasteners on the first side of the roof done, and it was time to start the exact same process over from the beginning on the other side of the roof. But this time I knew how big all my sheets of plywood needed to be. I knew how big all my pieces of metal needed to be, so I pre-cut everything on the ground before we even went up in the scissor lift. Falcon, I meant before we went up in the Falcon. Now, if I didn't know what I was doing on the first side of the roof, by the time we got to the second side, I was a flippin' expert. I mean, you should have seen me. I was plopping up plywood and nailing it down faster than you could say, "Hey Jason, your shoe's untied." Well, the joke's on you, because I was wearing slip-ons that day, so nothing was gonna slow me down. Sure, it might have been pouring down rain and the wind was gusting. You know, people complain about working in the rain all the time, and I gotta tell you, I kinda like it. Sure, you get wet and cold, but if you just embrace it and quit complaining, it's kinda nice. It's like working under a waterfall. People literally go on hikes to walk under waterfalls, and I gotta work out there all day long for free, and I didn't have to go anywhere. I mean, that's pretty darn good. Pretty soon, we were plopping up metal on that side and marking out where our fasteners needed to go. As you can see, I just went through with a tape measure and I just scratched a little X everywhere I wanted a fastener. That way I could come back and sink them all in, and I knew they'd be in a nice, straight, even line. And if you're a total roofing novice like I was before this and think, how is screwing a bunch of screws into a metal roof going to make it watertight? Well, these screws have a little rubber gasket on them. So when you screw them in, the gasket seals the hole, and boom, watertight. Science. I'm telling you guys, I'm pretty much an expert at this point, and I can't make any mistakes. That is until I realized I made a huge flippin' mistake. I didn't see this flashing in here that apparently we were supposed to put underneath this metal over the fascia board, and now we already put the metal up. So this is one way you can install that if you want. I actually prefer to do it this way. Some people put it down beforehand. Well, you know, us experts like to shove it underneath afterwards. But hey, at least when you're installing a metal roof, it comes with free refreshments. Ah, cool, clean Oregon water. Nothing like it in the world. That's good. Now, we were probably supposed to attach this flashing to the top of the fascia before we put the roof on, but now that we couldn't get to that, I just sank some screws right into the front of it. I thought it gave it a nice industrial vibe. Sure, it's probably the wrong way to do it, but I mean, are you surprised? Think about whose channel you're watching here. So with the metal on both sides of our roof and the flashing appropriately installed at the bottom of that metal, it was time to add the flashing onto the sides. Now, again, don't really know what we're supposed to do here, so I just decided to score the end of the flashing and cut it to match the fascia board. That seemed like it would look the best. Is that how the pros do it? Don't know. And then when it came to the top, well, I just scored that and cut it to match the peak. Well, I take that back. I cut one side at an angle to match the peak, but the other side I just left square because I figured I could fit the square side underneath the angled cut side, because in my head that made sense. And I was pretty shocked to find out that once I made all my cuts and I put it up there, that's when I realized, oh, it looked fantastic. Man, you guys thought I was gonna screw it up, didn't you? Then I thought while I was up here, I might as well throw the ridge cap on the top and just hold it in place with a couple screws until I can fasten the whole thing down, now that I have the flashing underneath it. So I got it all lined up where it needed to go, and I tacked it in place with a few screws, and then I finished hooking on all my flashing. And things were starting to come together. And as far as I could tell, all the flashing was layered correctly so that it should all be watertight, I hope. Again, first time ever making a roof. Looks pretty good to me. At this point, I was starting to feel pretty confident. The sun was even shining. And then we tried to move the scissor lift around to the back of the tree house, and that's when things went downhill. We quickly got it very, very stuck in the mud and could not get it out. That was until I realized that bark chips make a wonderful traction system for getting things unstuck. We just shoveled a ton of bark chips underneath the wheels, and what do you know? Boom, back in business. And we were doing the same sort of flashing shenanigans we did on the front, but this time on the back. And this time with much more experience, because we had already done it twice. And pretty soon, the flashing was... Oh, darn it, I forgot that I had to shove flashing under on this side. All right, I shoved some of the flashing under on this side, and now I'm going to say it. The flashing was all done. And looking pretty bright. Bright like a flash. Like flashing, you know. And then it was time to get back to the Falcon ladder and get that ridge cap completely installed. So once again, I propped up my ladder. I climbed to the tippy top of the roof. I grabbed the remaining piece for my ridge cap because it was too long for just one. So I'm just going to overlap this big section again. Don't know if that's okay, but these are the pieces the guy at the lumber store gave me, so making this up as I go along, people. And I stuck it on the very top. The nice thing about Falcon ladder is it got me up high enough that I could do all the screws on this side and lean over and do the screws on the other side as well, which meant I wasn't going to have to move the scissor lift again. I worked until it was almost dark, and pretty soon I had one screw left, and I was going to be complete. So I leaned way over the back of that 12-12 roof. I pulled the screw out of my mouth, and I drove it home, baby. And with that screw entering that corrugated metal roofing, I was now an experienced roofer. That's going on my resume. Please, though, if you hire me to do your roof, wait until the springtime, because I actually am pretty sick of working out in the rain. And Craig went home a long time ago, and I'm all by myself. But the important thing is, the roof was done. And just in time, too, because this literally happened the very next morning. I mean, it didn't last long, but for the 10 minutes that it did snow, it was nice to have the roof done. And it looks pretty darn good, if I do say so myself.
Oh, look at that! We put a roof on. Did I know what I was doing? No, absolutely no clue. Is it dry inside? Well, no, not really. But that's not the roof's fault. It's because there's no windows. And sometimes rain doesn't always come down straight. Sometimes it comes down at like a little bit of an angle because of the wind. And since there's no windows, it still gets wet. But the roof's good. I think. I really have no clue. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Check out the video description. Next week, we're doing windows and siding, and we're gonna get this thing all buttoned up. So come back for that. Okay, bye.
Safety first. Safety